I'm Andy,
I'm Drew.
and this is Spork.
Spork. All right, so before we jump into our topic this week, just a quick programming note that we'll probably be on a 2 to 3 week hiatus, kind of over the holidays into early January, but we'll be back in the new year with some spicy new hot takes. I almost choked on that there. It's got a lot planned.
I was going to say, that's the spice getting to you.
So so jumping into what we got planned for this episode, we're looking at the 2017 NBA draft, and in particular the lucky 13th pick of Donovan Mitchell, who was drafted by the Nuggets for the Jazz. And what we are, I'd say, evaluating here is the Nuggets keeping Donovan Mitchell and kind of how he evolves with that, dynamic duo that they end up having with Jamal Murray and the Joker, right?
Exactly. I think it's important to note with all this is like it can be debated if Denver would have picked Donovan Mitchell if it wasn't on behalf of another team. But I think for the sake of this, like we're saying that awesome workout that he had with the Jazz, he had the same awesome workout for the other teams that made him appealing.
Yeah. So I guess kind of some backstory. I think the Nuggets were pretty loaded at guard already, or at least maybe not loaded per se, but they had some decent depth there. And that was kind of where the Jazz were obviously brought Mitchell in for a workout and ended up trading up, was about 11 picks from the mid 20s to get him. And, we're really, I guess, from the Nuggets side, they got Trey Lyles back, and then we're looking for kind of more of a stretch four kind of guard, and ended up with Tyler Lydon in the draft. Whereas, the Jazz, I think, Mitchell had kind of a rough start to that first season, but I think it was late November, December, kind of in the first couple months there, he had his kind of breakout game and then was almost unbenchable after that for them.
Yeah, I mean the first 9-10 games of the year, like you said, going back to November, nothing super impressive, right? But once December hit, he became a little bit more formidable. Like, I mean, he's showing up in the box score, making an impact, making people better, and showing more of a skill. I think what was kind of interesting too is that we started seeing the offensive numbers, but even coming out of college, like he was thought to be a pretty good defender, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is more of his, like, yes, he was great, good offensive player, but man, he, with that wingspan, he could guard anybody. But I
Yeah,
don't think that's exactly what he was becoming known for right away.
No, and I think in the NBA you always think of a 3-and-D guy, but he didn't really have a great outside shot. He was more athletic, undersized guard that, with his wingspan, kind of played probably 3-4 inches taller than he actually is, and really almost like the prototype of Patino guard, right? That tough nosed defender that can get up and down the floor.
Yeah, definitely, was not afraid of contact. Um, that slasher type, like, gets to the rim. Um, and he, I think, like, consistency was always like a question. Um, with him, but kind of going into this, I think the Jazz they saw him work out. And they're like, oh, this is yeah, I don't know. I think he put his best foot forward. I think
Yeah.
that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. So flipping the script and kind of looking at what the Nuggets did have, kind of at that shooting guard, small forward position where Mitchell would be slotting in. Because they're set at point guard with Jamal Murray. I think this is his second or third season. Then Jokic he's only 22 at the time. But then they have Wilson Chandler and Gary Harris and Will Barton as kind of their predominant 2-3 positions, where I think Will Barton finished, I'm looking at Basketball Reference here, it was fourth, I think, in sixth man of the year. So ended up starting about 40 games. Gary Harris had 65 games, Wilson Chandler 71. So that's kind of the guys that he'd be competing with for minutes there. And really none of those guys are, I'll say, 3-point experts or anything. So, it's not, I'm trying to make a case that he's not trying to fill a gap that doesn't exist, I think he could easily slot in and take over one of those roles, right? And I think the flip side is they had Paul Millsap and Kenneth Faried, who was getting up there. I think he had some injuries that season, and then Mason Plumlee also getting some games that year. So I think they really were looking to strengthen their front court to kind of pair with Jokic, which probably is part of the reason why they looked away from Mitchell. But, this is also the time where I feel like the NBA is starting to get smaller and quicker and, trending towards almost positionless basketball, right? And that's something that, I think, like we've mentioned with his versatility, you put that next to Jokic and what he's able to do out there, I think that's a pretty interesting combination right out of the gate.
Yeah, the big focus, like going through all this research, and you touched on it, is like you have all this depth at this guard position, whether it be point guard, shooting guard, combo guard, and there's a lot of depth there. And I kept thinking more and more, it's like somebody who is such a great passer, the way that Jokic is, like that need for that traditional point guard, I don't know if it's as strong, right? So with part of me kept sitting there thinking like, man, you're gonna be kind of log jammed with Jamal Murray, Donovan Mitchell, Gary Harris, but in some ways you may not be, especially if those guys are helping spread the floor. And you have somebody like Mitchell who can at least create for himself.
Yeah.
And somebody like Jokic who could draw the big guys away from the rim. I think there's an immediate impact that he could have. I think it's probably a little bit slower because the Nuggets wouldn't have to rely on him right away because they do have other guys, whereas the Jazz, they had to rely on Mitchell early on so he could kind of cut his teeth and kind of work through that that rough first, second month of his career.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was kind of playing around trying to find out when that Spark game could be. And the closest I got, and it lines up pretty close to his actual timing of a breakout with the Nuggets or with the Jazz. I'm going to get those confused going back and forth. But there was a game in November 13th where the Nuggets only scored 82 points in the game. Mm-hmm. But Gary Harris was out injured. Juancho Hernan-Gomez was out with mononucleosis. And so basically they had an awful offensive night, only putting up 82 points. Moutier and Jamal Murray shot poorly, and it kind of lends itself to a guy that can just, like you said, create his own shot and get in there and, use his athleticism to probably dictate that second unit, not necessarily the starters, but, those stretches between quarters where they're getting their guys rest. But, kind of wedge himself into that rotation.
So, yeah, I think we can definitely get into the future of the Nuggets here.
Yeah.
In some pretty good detail. Because I'm trying to think about the best way to articulate this thought, but it's they already had a very good team, very good core.
Yeah, and it's not this season, but the very next season, 2018-19, they're second in the Western Conference.
And a lot of that is like I think that's probably where they stay. But I mean, like the end result, does somebody like Donovan Mitchell, as a rookie as a second year player, can he help move them further along in the playoffs? Like, because we know that in the playoffs, his kind of is like when he shines,
Yeah.
like when he steps up and plays his best. And so the Denver timeline to the championship, he probably can add or bring that timeline up, assuming that they can maintain the core that they had already established.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at that first playoff run they had in Utah his rookie year. I mean, they go all the way to the, I guess they beat Oklahoma City, and then this isn't the one I'm looking for. Must be the next season. Hold on. Because, they got 5 games there. And then the second season.
That's all right. I don't have their full history in front of me yet.
Well, we'll come back to that when I'm more well prepared. Looking at his playoffs performance kind of throughout, I mean, this is a guy, what was it, the 2020-2021 season? I mean, he led Utah to the best record in the NBA. So, that's as a fourth-year player. He was an all-star in his third season. So, I think the writing was on the wall for what he's done to step into some big moments early. And, I think what he's able to accomplish with Murray, I think it probably takes a backseat to Murray and Jokic, just with those guys being the de facto options, right? But that's not to say he doesn't completely own games at some point throughout that stretch.
It's like Denver's timeline to a championship probably moves up. My concern, honestly, would be later on. So the championship that they did end up winning in the Jokic era, it might be really hard for them to retain all the players that they have.
Yeah.
And the same, balance of talent in different positions, right? Because eventually Donovan Mitchell has the same impact and trajectory is what he's had with the Jazz and Cleveland. And the same thing with Jokic and Murray. Eventually, you're going to have to pay all these guys. So guys that came later on, like Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon, can you realistically afford to keep them?
Yeah.
After, especially, Porter, he's after his rookie contract, is he just going to bolt?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, he did sign the max extension with the Jazz. And I'm trying to think of another, I feel like some of these teams are able to figure the money out for kind of those first two contracts with their budding young stars. But obviously, whoever's last ends up having to take the cut, right? So, I'm trying to think of the Celtics, when they had Marcus Smart, Jason Tatum, and Jaylen Brown, Derek White, kind of those four guys. Probably not. I guess Marcus Smart had been there for a while, but yeah, keeping those three guys together, it felt like they kind of had a staggered 6-ish year run together. So yeah, I think it's probably is around COVID really, where it's, where does he end up from there? And maybe it's a sign and trade. Maybe he still ends up in Cleveland. Somewhere around that, or maybe it's somewhere else. Like I know the Knicks were interested at the time too, or at least that was floated out there. How true that was, I don't know, but
I think before we switch over to like the impact on maybe the rest of the NBA or the Jazz or whatnot, there I tried to go back and look at who Denver drafted in later years. And they're, I don't know if they necessarily drafted anybody with like the specific Donovan Mitchell skill set. I mean, there were guys who were a little bit more touted, highly touted.
I was gonna say
they didn't like necessarily.
I was gonna say the next year they picked Michael Porter Jr.
Right.
And, he's a little bit, I feel like he fits kind of a similar type role, but then again, he's 6'10",
Right. Yeah.
But
he's maybe like build wise, kind of like a Jason Tatum.
Yeah.
Right. Like, but, I think that's something to be considered. I mean, and, some of these guys just haven't panned out yet, or maybe at all, but yeah, I think it's kind of like the ripple effect for Denver. I don't know if it necessarily changes their draft strategy, but it might change where they are actually drafting in the draft.
Yeah.
Even though they're already drafting pretty low.
Yeah, I was gonna say they had some pretty successful seasons. They're not gonna be jumping too far one way or the other there.
Right.
But I will say it does kind of, I know you said you don't want to talk about bigger impact, but looking at the Jazz side of everything though, like they don't have really any I guess they don't have their star that kind of ascends with Mitchell there before he gets traded. So yeah, they have kind of they're probably drafting higher, and that obviously will shake some things up in the draft lottery, presumably. Yeah, I think so. Staying with the Nuggets, they were first in 2018-19, or I guess second in the West. Then they were third in the West in COVID year. Or no, third in COVID, third the year after. And then sixth. And then all of a sudden, then the following year is when they win the MVP or win the NBA Finals. But, during all this, like I mentioned, Jokic is winning, 3 out of 4 MVPs during this stretch. And, Jamal Murray has become almost a side note, right?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because so Jamal Murray had like the bubble breakout where it was like, oh, the dude has arrived. He's shooting arrows, like he's and I'm still like always
Donovan
surprised.
Mitchell made the bubble arrive, right? Him and Rudy Gobert.
Yeah, they did. Funny how that all happened that way. Yeah. Yeah, but Jamal Murray is like so interesting because I remember watching his games and thinking like, man, he, he's he's next up. But I
Yeah.
think there was an injury in there, and it's hard. It's hard being the number two. Behind an MVP. It's like you're not gonna get the same publicity,
Yeah.
and it's harder to make a name for yourself.
Yeah. Well, in that COVID, I'm trying to remember how that series with the Lakers played out because they ended up losing 4-1. Um, Murray looks like he shot pretty well throughout. Just looking at the box scores real quick here, but I think you had Anthony Davis, who was kind of, you talk about guys that you thought were taking that next step to just completely own the upcoming decade. He was, I mean, there's a game here. He had 31 points, 37 and 10. He's grabbing the leading points over LeBron in some of these games.
Right.
Granted, yeah, the closeout game, LeBron has 38, 16, and 10. So that's kind of hard to knock, but.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think how the two guards developed next to each other, I think would have been interesting to see, and how, because they're gonna have to pick one that plays better with Jokic, like you're saying, to pay and keep and invest in. So, and Murray stretches the floor, I feel like, better.
He plays better into like the catch and shoot.
Yeah.
Right. Donovan, he needs to take that dribble.
Yeah.
At least when I think about him, that's how I picture him. Whether or not that's fair, that's just how I picture him.
Yeah. But so moving up their timeline, yeah, it's hard because you look at those championships during kind of that run there, and you look at the teams that are winning. It is hard to say which ones you think that they make it over, over the existing teams or the existing champs there. Because, and I'll run through them. I mean, this is like Golden State's peak run here, kind of right at the tail end of it. So they win in 2018 in the third of three straight LeBron, Cavaliers, and Warriors. And then, and that's the final one with Durant, I think. Yeah, and then Kawhi and the Raptors beat the Warriors in 19. We talked about the Lakers in the bubble. And then Giannis gets his over the Suns in 2021. And I think that's kind of where we're saying the outside of this 5 to 6 year window between the three of them ends, right?
Yeah, right around here.
Which is, ironically right before they win.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so then you're saying Jokic will end up a multiple champion, but maybe he gets past. I think their best shot is probably in 2019. I mean, it's hard to imagine anybody getting past those Warriors teams until that 2019 season when they were finally beaten by the Raptors. And can they beat Kawhi Leonard that year?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with this is the hard thing about the NBA is that it's become a super team kind of league. Um, so by creating another super team, it's like, who's the best of these, and not saying that Golden State, I mean, honestly, Denver would have come about the super team very similar to how Golden State came about theirs. All through the draft, all through development. And I think it'd be cool to, if your top two teams, kind of came about it the same way. Maybe it changes how the whole league was built. in general, and then does it does it help them actually
Yeah.
overcome some of the adversity of trying to piece together a team versus just having it naturally form into a
Yeah.
contender?
Yeah, and it almost kind of is reminiscent of the Oklahoma City Thunder with Harden, Westbrook, and Durant, where, they got there so early. It was like the second or third season they were all together, lost to the Miami Heat. And you thought, oh, this is a sign of 6, 7 championships to come. And, it was 10 years later before now they're on basically the same situation with the entirely different cast of characters that they have in Oklahoma City. But now it's like, oh, this is actually what those guys were supposed to be. And they're, I think as it stands right now, they've won what, like 24 out of 25 games this season and just going, you know, running through the league.
It's insane. It's insane. Yeah. So I think there's a real possibility that Denver could do that by coming across this embarrassment of riches organically.
Yeah, and
Um,
I'll, I think my thought, and you can correct me here if you disagree, but I think they have kind of a outside shot of winning 2 titles before they actually ended up winning. And I think it's the COVID one. And because it's just a weird year, right? And I think if
sure.
you got all that together, in theory, they can all mesh and they get past LeBron and then they can get past the Heat in the East. And then I think the following year, when I guess the previous year over the Warriors and the Kawhi led Raptors. But, you take away that championship from LeBron in the bubble, and then all of a sudden I think his legacy is different being a not winning with the Lakers, right?
Yeah. I mean, does it does he leave the Lakers? You know,
Yeah.
I think winning the bubble championship is probably what kept him with the Lakers,
Yeah.
and not like going off and chasing another title somewhere else.
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess the 3 that I think are most likely, it's either, the Kawhi Leonard Raptors, LeBron in the bubble, or Giannis's over the Phoenix Sun in 21, which is kind of just a weird.
It's another weird one.
Yeah. But you think they get one of those 3, and then, you look at the implications for either Kawhi, LeBron, or Giannis not having X title there. And it really, I think there's a lot of ramifications that come out of that lost ring for one of those superstars. And then, you're giving another one to, I'm assuming Jokic is the centerpiece, the finals MVP, and he ends up with 2
Yeah,
at that point. Kind of puts him in a different category as well.
I do think that Mitchell gets a Finals MVP um, in there. I don't think he actually gets a regular season MVP at any point,
Yeah.
but I do think,
I think he averages like 35 a game for the finals or
yeah,
something like that.
exactly. It's just something insane.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe not realistic, but definitely crazy. So did you give any thought to like what the alternate scenario would be for the Jazz?
Not as much because I assumed it would not go well.
I I did just like a little bit of background on this because it was interesting. Like the whole thing, reading about like Donovan Mitchell's workouts with a lot of these teams were not great, but with the Jazz, he must have looked phenomenal to the point where like he even admitted after he got drafted and traded that he's like, oh yeah, I mean it makes sense. That was my best workout.
Yeah.
I remember him like coming out of college and when he was drafted 13, I was like, 13? We're Louisville guys. And he was great, he was dynamic, but I was still shocked that he would go that high.
Especially all the other players that, we've seen come through there that jumped. I mean, he had, off the chart athleticism, but nothing. And there's a reason we're not NBA coaches, but nothing then projected the way I thought it would have gone now for his career.
Yes, exactly. I think that's kind of where, the whole thing was shocking a little bit that they would draft up. This is the second time the Jazz did this scenario with Denver. I think it was like 3 or 4 years. I think 4 years earlier, they did it with Rudy Gobert.
Yeah,
and made that trade with Denver to get him. So maybe it's just their thing, and they did this evaluation with Mitchell. But I started thinking, I was like, okay, say Denver doesn't take the bait, but Denver loves Mitchell. Mitchell goes to Denver, and now the Jazz, what do they do? I think there's a scenario that they decided to draft up and take somebody like Bam Adebayo.
Yeah.
Which, he was on their I think on their big board to be drafted.
It's an interesting fit next to Rudy Gobert.
Yeah, so I think at the time they were looking for some.
You're saying the Jazz take Bam, right?
The Jazz. So I think, let's see, like,
because Gobert goes and he averages. He's the defensive player of the year 3 out of the next 4 years.
Right.
Well, yeah, and Bam is, I guess he's kind of that hybrid 4-5, right? He's not a great outside shooter.
He's just a big guy. Like, his measurables are like what Dwight Howard's were. Coming out of high school. Like, he was 6'10", 240, had a better vertical than Dwight Howard did. Like, he was a dynamic dude. And it looked like the Jazz, were really focused on shooters and bigs. I think they really liked the idea of, like, just having guys that could fill those roles. But I don't think they're necessarily drafting up for anybody else. And if they, obviously they drafted who they did with the 24th pick, but drafted who they did with 24th pick, but could they have gone a different direction? I actually saw like where Derek White's name had come up, but it's like I don't know if that might have been more of a stretch than anybody else.
Yeah, and I feel like at that point it seems like normally the top, depending on the year, 5 to 15 players are pretty well figured out. Maybe the order changes from 5 to 15, but I feel like after that, it's always a kind of a roulette wheel of who goes where, when, and then you look back and you're like, man, that guy got drafted 28th instead of like 15th. What were all these guys thinking?
Yeah, exactly. But outside of that, that was about as far into the Jazz alternate scenario that I went.
Yeah, and I was just looking. So they went. So outside of that first year back from COVID, where they finished first in the, it was a shortened season, 72 games, but finished first, but lost in the semifinals to the Clippers. Outside of that, they never finished higher than 5th in that kind of tenure there. So you take off Mitchell, and 5th looks very unattainable, no matter who you fill that with, probably.
Exactly.
So, and since he's left, they've been 12th, and 15th.
Yeah, I think he was pretty good.
Granted, they got rid of Gobert about the same time and have definitely gone a different route with their franchise there. So
Yeah, I mean it's hard to lose like your best two players and remain relevant.
yeah. So yeah, I think that's about it I had on my agenda for all this. Anything else
Yeah.
that you had?
Nope, I think I went through all my stuff.
Yeah. So we got Finals MVP for Donovan Mitchell. At least one, maybe 2 rings for him. 3 rings for Jokic and Murray, and yeah, maybe Mitchell's. Who knows where he's playing now?
Exactly.
So, all right.
Well, happy holidays. Happy
Yeah.
New Year. Talk to you next year.
Yeah. Enjoy the time off. We'll be back. And that's a wrap for today. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and be sure to tune in next time.